When I was a kid on the school blacktop, there were a few card games that went in and out of fashion. Maybe you remember them. There was Pokemon, which no one really knew the rules of, and we all just thought we should pretend to understand because we played the DS games. There was Yu-Gi-Oh!, which I personally didn't dip into much, but I thought seemed really epic and important on account of the extra zeros put in the health and attack numbers. And then there was Magic the Gathering. This game was often discussed in elementary school, but no one had actually played it. It was for big kids, middle schoolers, and older. You only knew about it because Andrew's older brother played, and Andrew had stolen his brother's copy of Door to Nothingness, and you would all gather around and stare at it during recess. You had no idea what all those symbols meant, but you knew that if you had them all, you could make your opponent lose instantly. Well, when middle school came, and suddenly I was a big kid, one of my friends had some Magic cards they didn't want anymore, and I jumped at the opportunity to get my hands on them. The cards were mostly from the Innistrad block, full of vampires and zombies and werewolves. I was enthralled. I started collecting cards and playing the game, first just with my friends at school and a lot at summer camp, but then at the local game store too. Soon I was drafting regularly, and Magic had become a consistent part of my week. At some point, I started getting interested in the game's design. There was actually a period of my life where I would have told you that my dream job was designing Magic cards at Wizards of the Coast. Now, it's impossible to learn about the design of Magic without coming across the work of one man, Mark Rosewater, the head designer of Magic and the most public member of R&D. Among the somewhat niche community of Magic the Gathering players, Rosewater is a major celebrity. His online presence is enormous, pumping out a weekly column on MagicTheGathering.com, a daily Magic the Gathering comic, dozens of answers to MTG-related questions daily on his Q&A blog, and even a twice-weekly podcast about the game that he records during the only time he's not doing anything else with his brain capacity, his drive to work. Rosewater is truly prolific in the world of Magic the Gathering. One of the things Rosewater claims about Magic is that it is a great game largely because of 3 genius ideas that Richard Garfield had back in 1993 when he created the game. The first is the concept of the trading card game. That's right, it didn't exist before Richard Garfield invented it when he created the first set of Magic the Gathering in the early 90s. There were trading cards, like baseball cards, and there were card games, like Go Fish, but no one had actually ever thought to put them together before. Richard Garfield did, and poof, it's hard to imagine trading cards without a game component. And all those other games you played on the blacktop as a kid? They're all just wannabes. The original was Magic. The second genius idea is the mana system. That is, the way that you're able to build resources in Magic. One of the problems you encounter when creating a deck building game is the way to have the power level available to each player build up over the course of the game. In Yu-Gi-Oh, for example, you have to sacrifice smaller creatures to play bigger ones, so you can't just drop your biggest, baddest guy on the first turn. But Magic uses what's called the mana system. See, there are land cards that you can tap to create mana, and then each card has a cost in the upper right corner that tells you how much and what kind of mana it needs to be cast. So, for example, this card needs 1 white mana and 3 mana of any color. You can only play 1 land card per turn, so the amount of mana that you can spend slowly increases over the course of the game as you play more and more lands. This allows the game to follow a natural power progression. The third and final innovation, though, is the one that I want to focus on today, and that is the concept of the color pie, sometimes called the color wheel. If you look at the back of a Magic card, you'll see a pentagon of 5 colors. These colors, according to Garfield, represent 5 primal forces or ideas in nature. The entirety of the Magic lore and card design stems from these colors and what they represent. As Rosewater wrote in a column in 2006, quote, "If the concept of trading card games is the brains, the color wheel is the heart. Both mechanics and flavor start with the color wheel. It's the one thing that binds all aspects of the game together." So let's take a look at the color pie and what exactly each of the colors, white, blue, black, red, and green, represents. It's easy to get the impression from the game that white is good and black is evil, blue is something to do with reading books and casting spells, red is like fire and dragons and stuff, and green is nature. But in reality, it's a lot more nuanced and interesting than that. White. White, as a color, wants to achieve peace. It sees that there's enough in the world that everyone can have what they need, and that selfish interests and disorder prevent us from achieving the perfect harmonious society. It believes there's an absolute right and an absolute wrong, and that one should live in accordance with the rules of that absolute goodness, both in religion and in law. In the game, it's the color of angels and spirits, but also of soldiers and knights, noble warriors fighting for the greater good of society. Blue. Blue wants to achieve perfection, and it does so through the pursuit of knowledge. This is why it's the color of wizards and scholars who seek knowledge and mastery. It sees that we're all capable of anything if we work hard enough and learn enough. Blue believes that all problems can be broken down and solved logically, and that thought should always precede action. The mind is the ultimate tool, and we must use it to the fullest to improve ourselves continually throughout our lives. Black. Black seeks power, and it is willing to do anything it can to get it. It's the realist, who sees that the world is unfair and brutal. So why shouldn't you be as brutal or unfair as you need to get what you want? The only way to make sure there's someone looking out for you is to look out for yourself. So that's what everyone should do, and if they don't, they deserve to fail. If you try to lift up the weak, they'll just pull you down with them. It's hard to accept, but it's the truth. But if you have the willpower and the might, you can remake this world in your own image. Red. Red wants to be free to follow its heart. Life is an adventure, and if you live it moment by moment doing what your heart tells you, you're sure to have a good one. Everyone's always regretting the past and worrying about the future, but Red lives in the now, following its desires instead of suppressing them. People are always making rules and concocting plans, but to what end? Just live and let live and it'll all work out. Green. Green wants acceptance of the world and of the self. The natural world around us is harmonious, so why tamper with it? Why look for solutions to all your problems when the answer is right in front of you? You were born into a place in the world, so embrace it. Be what you are and be it well. Instead of worrying about all the little things that aren't quite right about your life, try to understand how beautiful the bigger picture is, and how great it is that you get to play a role in it. So there are 5 colors at the core of the game, but why are they arranged in a pentagon? Well, each color is actually positioned very particularly, so that the 2 colors next to it are its allies, and the 2 opposite it are its enemies. You can understand the overlap between 2 allied colors by looking at their enemy in common. So, for example, for white and blue, you look at red. The thing that is the antithesis of red is planning, especially on a societal scale, and that is exactly what white and blue overlap on. When white and blue get together, they become bureaucrats and organizers, obsessed with structure and design of societies. This flows naturally from white's obsession with order and security, and blue's with forethought and perfection. Similarly, you can understand an enemy pair by looking at the internal conflict of their shared ally. Red believes in following its heart and being free, but it's torn between the acceptance of the world around us that green preaches and the change for personal gain that black seeks. If I try to force my view of the world on others, I'm not allowing them to follow their freedom. But if I accept the world as it is, then people might be suppressed by others. The color wheel also gives us, in addition to 5 single colors, 5 allied color pairs: white-blue, blue-black, black-red, red-green, and green-white; 5 enemy pairs: white-black, blue-red, black-green, red-white, and green-blue; 5 shards of each color and its 2 allies: white-blue-black, blue-black-red, black-red-green, red-green-white, and green-white-blue; 5 wedges of each color and its 2 enemies: white-black-red, blue-red-green, black-green-white, red-white-blue, and green-blue-black; and 4 5-color combinations: whiteless, blueless, blackless, redless, and greenless, which, if you ask me, is an excellent bit of parallel structure. Everything in Magic can be broken down into 5s. These relationships and conflicts are at the source of the game's characters and mechanics. Okay, so now that you've gotten a crash course in the color pie, it's time to return to me. I absorbed all of this stuff about Magic subconsciously within the first couple years, and continued going on with my life, not really thinking much of it beyond the game, as I'm sure many don't. I went to school, took classes, and lived the rest of my life, with Magic just a small part of it. Over the next few years, I learned a lot, in school and on my own. In English class, I read some of the classics, like Hamlet, about a man torn between action and inaction. The to be or not to be soliloquy is about whether or not Hamlet should act to kill his uncle, the king. In history, I learned about the clash between America and the Soviet Union in the 20th century, a battle between capitalism and communism, the American individual versus the Soviet collective. In civics class, I learned about Hobbes, Rousseau, and Locke, who asked questions about the state of nature and the social contract. Is man naturally cruel and brutish, as Hobbes says, or compassionate and peaceful, as Rousseau does? Or is he, like Locke claims, a blank slate? At synagogue, I pondered with my peers and my elders questions of God and the nature of my mind and soul. With or without God, are my actions predestined, either because I'm just a collection of particles in space, or because I'm a puppet in God's universe? Or am I free to choose my actions, either because I have a God-given soul, or because I'm a conscious being somehow separate from the unthinking particles around me? And in my own reading, I learned from thinkers like Jordan Peterson about the battle between order and chaos, emblematized by the yin-yang. Do I need structure, rules, and discipline, or passion, inspiration, and creativity in order to achieve happiness? These were the sorts of big ideas that I was exposed to in high school, and their implications and extensions fascinated me. And all the while, I kept playing Magic. It was fun, after all. And then, in one of my literature classes, we learned about a number of theories for literary analysis, the likes of dialectical materialism, deconstruction, feminism, psychoanalysis, etc. Now, up until this point, my literary training had been almost entirely formalist, meaning I'd only ever been taught to analyze a text of literature for the text itself, and nothing more. And here I was being told that theories like Marx's dialectical materialism, which I knew from my reading of economics was not taken seriously as a theory of how actual economies work, could be treated as a valid system of interpretation in the realm of literature. Even if the economy wasn't a zero-sum contest for resources between different economic classes, maybe some narrative fictions were. It is a pretty salient narrative, after all. Or take Freud, whose ideas no one seriously believed in the field of psychology, could be given new life in analyzing literary characters. Was this character a representation of the id, or that one the superego? Even if that's not really how our brains function, again, it's a powerful idea. And I was just learning about second-wave feminism in my American history class. Why not extend our criticism of gender roles and gender construction in society to those constructions as they appear in literature, too? Come to think of it, why couldn't any framework for understanding some parts of the world, whether it be the realist theory of international relations or Darwin's theory of natural selection, be applied to stories and narratives to help their understanding? One day, I was sitting down for a game of Magic at my local game store, and I couldn't stop thinking about the book we were reading in my literature class, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I was thinking about the conflict that Jekyll faced, that he cared about his reputation and status in society as the respected Dr. Jekyll, but had uncontrollable impulses for violence that he needed to let out as Hyde. And as I thought about it, I tapped lands, cast spells, and tried to reduce my opponent's life total to 0. I don't remember what was going on in the game at the time, but for a second, I was thinking about the book just as I looked at the back of a Magic card. And all of a sudden, something clicked. The conflict between Jekyll and Hyde. Actually, no, wait. All of the conflicts that I learned about in literature class. Actually, no, wait. All of the conflicts that I learned about in every part of my life were on the back of that Magic card. You see, Shakespeare's conflict between action and inaction, it was the conflict between red and blue representing thought and reflection, and red representing passion and action. The battle between capitalism and communism, that's black versus white representing the Soviet collective need and communist cooperation, and black representing the exceptional individualism of America on capitalist competition. Rousseau versus Locke, that's blue and green arguing that we have an inherent nature and we should embrace it rather than messing with it, and blue saying that we're all blank slates who can shape ourselves into whatever we want to be. Free will versus determinism, that's black versus green. Black arguing that we have control over our lives and that our choices in life are fundamental determinants of our own fulfillment, and green arguing that we're simply observers in a deterministic universe, unable to change our nature and destined to serve our role, whatever it may be in the world. Yin-yang, order versus chaos, that's red versus white seeking order and peace through rules, discipline, and society, and red seeking autonomy and pleasure through freedom from those things. This, I realized, was Jekyll's conflict. He was torn between the white in Jekyll and the red in Hyde. And the beautiful thing about these conflicts is that there's no clear right answer to any of them. They're all eternal and deeply human, right? Order versus chaos, nature versus nurture, emotion versus reason, free will versus determinism, the individual versus the group. That's why they loom so large in the annals of history, literature, and philosophy. Mark Rosewater discusses this idea on his podcast, Drive to Work. Let's take a look.
You can give me any color in any conflict, and I can fight for that color. That it's very easy to look at white versus black and go, oh, well, good versus evil, okay, clearly white. But when I give the speech and I talk about self-empowerment and I talk about the idea of merit, people start going, whoa. I mean, I like merit. Merit's good. You know what I'm saying? Like, that both sides have really valid arguments.
Let's do a case study to prove my point. Take red versus white, order versus chaos. Too much order is fascism, but too much chaos is anarchy. In reality, the right answer is a balance between the two. This conflict, order versus chaos, can be used to explain a lot of things. Take American politics, for example. There are two major factions, progressives and conservatives, one trying broadly to preserve institutions and structure, and one trying to disrupt that structure and dismantle those institutions. Both are essential for a healthy society. If we only had conservatives, we would never be able to adapt to meet new needs or reflect changing technology or culture. But if we only had progressives, we would lose all of those things that have allowed us to succeed so far as a society. The answer is balance. We want to make sure that we conserve the things that are working well, but progress past the ones that aren't. And I want to note here that red versus white isn't the only color conflict that can explain two-party politics. Green versus blue seems like it could be similarly illuminating, and probably some of the others too. That's another cool thing about the color pie. Often, different color pie conflicts can explain the same real-world conflict from a different angle. Another place the red versus white conflict appears is in movies, as Mark Rosewater discusses on one episode of his podcast. Let's take a look.
Ferris Bueller's Day Off is a white-red conflict. The Dark Knight is also a white-red conflict. Now, in each case, for example, in Ferris Bueller, the protagonist is the red side, and in Dark Knight, the protagonist is the white side. The villain is the red side. What's the philosophy of your main character? If your philosophy of the main character is all about embracing the day, take Ferris Bueller, it's like, look, he just wants to have an awesome day. He goes to school all the time, and what is he learning from school, And it's like, for one day, let me do something that forever will give me this moment in life that's an amazing day. And so he's trying to embrace that. He's following his heart. He's doing a very red thing. But meanwhile, you take the Joker in Dark Knight, and he is embracing chaos in a dark and dangerous way. You can be a hero, you can be a villain. You can embrace something in a positive way, or you can embrace it in a negative way.
Isn't that so cool? We as an audience can really be rooting for Batman's order to triumph over Joker's chaos in The Dark Knight, but enjoy it so much when Ferris Bueller's impulse for chaos triumphs over the order of his everyday life. Yes, the color pie was developed as a way to generate story and mechanics for a children's trading card game. But when Richard Garfield distilled an entire universe into 5 colors, he created something that I think deserves to stand up there with dialectical materialism, deconstruction, or psychoanalysis in terms of its power for explaining narratives. So, literature professors, make it happen. Students, the next time your teacher asks you to pick a theory of literary analysis to analyze a text, pick Magic the Gathering. Though I know the chances of this actually catching on are slim to none, I do think it's an interesting exercise in understanding how ideas in one realm can often be applied to another. And my question for you is, where's the color pie in your life? What ideas about the universe have you learned from something unassuming, and how can you apply them to something greater? Look everywhere. You never know where it may be. It may be in a book or in the classroom, or it may be on the back of a Magic the Gathering card. And I'll see you next time.